Welcome to the Expanding Consciousness podcast with your hosts, Michael Wally and Nicholas Haag. In this podcast, we explore ways to sharpen our awareness, make life more enjoyable, be a little kinder, become more authentic, less reactive, more present, and ultimately expand our consciousness. We're happy to have you along for the ride, and if you do enjoy these conversations, please leave a review or a comment, as this goes a long way for us. Enough of the promotional talk and enjoy this episode.
And today our topic is going to be around various states of the nervous system through the lens of polyvagal theory.
Right. As you are the one of us who's a bit more knowledgeable on this topic, I have a bunch of questions around polyvagal theory. But maybe we can start with, or maybe you can start by explaining to us what is polyvagal theory, and also maybe answering the question why you think it's important.
Yeah, great question. So from my understanding, polyvagal theory basically outlines a couple different states of the nervous system. You could say it's a model or a framework that we can use to understand our experience through the lens of what's happening within us on the level of the nervous system. And so there are three basic states that we typically talk about. So there are two survival states, one which is sort of hypoactivation or low activation of the nervous system, and that's sometimes known as freeze, also known as dorsal vagal. And that's basically when we're kind of stopped and not really able to do anything, not able to function very well. On the other end of the spectrum, also another survival state, we have hyperarousal or sympathetic, also sometimes known as fight or flight. And oftentimes the state might be marked by anger, anxiety, sort of a compulsion to do something. Also not at our best in that state. And so that leads us to the third state, which is known as ventral vagal or social engagement, connection. And this state is where we're most capable of having executive functioning and kind of being ourselves and showing up and performing to the best of our ability. So, it's important because it can really help us understand what's going on within us and help us work with some of the more uncomfortable things that might be happening.
Right. So would you say that the ventral vagal state is our natural state of being?
It's really our optimal state. It's our homeostatic state, right? It's when we're well balanced. Whether or not it's natural, I would say normal within our society might actually be a little bit more dysregulated, right? So it's a fully regulated state.
What about fight and flight? Can you give some examples when we would get our nervous system in such a state?
Yeah. I kind of like to tell this story around the different states of our nervous system. So I'll just kind of take a step back and hit on that. So a lot of times we tend to not really enjoy anxiety or stress or depression, naturally speaking. Of course, we don't necessarily appreciate that this is actually our nervous system doing what it's supposed to be doing in this situation, right? So I like to tell this kind of survival story about like why these states exist and what their purposes are. So I like this example of maybe being chased by a lion or something, and there's some sort of existential threat, right? So first you notice some sort of predator. It's coming at you. This causes hyperactivation. There's a lot of stimulation. The nervous system starts to ramp up to prepare you to potentially run away or fight. And this puts you into that sympathetic, the hyperarousal, the fight or flight state. And so initially, say this animal starts chasing you, you're going to feel a lot of stress. You're going to feel a lot of anxiety, right? You're going to be really hyper focused. Your mind is going to be producing thoughts like, I need to get out of here. I need to do something about this. And really, the value in doing this is to keep you fixated on that existential threat, right? You wouldn't want to, start chasing a butterfly or get distracted by something. You really need to be focused on what's potentially attacking you at that time, right? And, continuing the story, say that it reaches a point where it's kind of got you cornered. This might increase the activation. You might get into, a rage. You might start getting really angry, and that's preparing you to potentially fight off this predator, this thing that might kill you otherwise, right? And then, say the story takes a turn for the worst, and you realize, okay, I can't win. There's nothing I can do here. You might go into hypoarousal. Basically, your system starts shutting down. It's potentially preparing for death. It's causing you to freeze up and not be able to do anything. Again, this serves a very useful purpose. It's preventing you from flailing around. It's making you, basically play possum, play dead, as sort of a last-ditch effort at survival. So, from that perspective, all of these states serve very useful purposes, right?
I heard that when we go into this freeze state, so what you said, when we're kind of accepting the situation, or when we're overwhelmed with the situation to the point where our body is kind of freezing, it's the natural equivalent to taking an opioid. So I think that's also what is happening in the body. So the body is actually calmer to cope with the situation, and what happens internally in such a state would probably be dissociation. So kind of as a coping mechanism to deal with the situation. Nevertheless, what certainly happens in such a situation is trauma. How to deal with the trauma that happens in these free situations afterwards? Is there any way we can deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So nature kind of gives us a clue as far as how to deal with these situations post lion attack, right? So, for example, like a possum, it'll go into a freeze response when it knows that it can no longer escape. As it starts to come out of that freeze response, one of the first things it'll do is it'll look around. It'll orient itself to its environment to see if the threat is still there. If it recognizes that there's no threat, if it's able to take in the environment sort of on the sensory level, then it'll start to come out of that freeze response. It'll start to continue basically processing that freeze response and starting to get into a more regulated state. So as human beings, one of the ways that we can do this, and fairly simple, it does take some practice to make it more effective, but just really to take in your environment, right? Like look around, see what's here right away. That might be noticing a couple different things that you see. If you're indoors, maybe you notice some furniture. What does that furniture look like? What color is it? And you might also, take it in with some of the other senses. What are a couple of things that you hear in your immediate environment? What's here? What's present right now? Right? And maybe also feeling, right? So maybe you're, sitting in a chair. And so notice some of the sensations of the support of the chair, maybe the softness of the chair. You might also feel, with your hands, okay, what does this surface feel like? And just notice the sensations. That really starts to bring you into the present moment. And it also signals to the nervous system that you're safe. And so it can start to help you come out of that freeze response. Of course, a chronic freeze response is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more complicated, but we're kind of talking high level today. So that's one way that we can kind of start to utilize this to work with the state of our nervous system ourselves.
What an animal would do after a situation of, I don't know, freeze or hyperarousal would probably be shaking. Like we've all seen how dogs, for example, deal with any kind of tension. They just have this almost like a built-in mechanism of where they just start shaking rapidly, and then you can literally see the tension go away. And I was always wondering, like, why don't we have that possibility? That would be so nice to get rid of tension. Would it make sense to, I don't know, shake in some way after hyperarousal?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's great. You're really hitting it there. So yeah, we do have that response. However, in our society, a lot of our natural responses, a lot of the natural ways that we process our emotions and come out of these states tends to be maybe looked down upon and programmed out of us, right? Because if you're shaking or something, then someone doesn't think, oh, they're just processing a little bit of trauma. Let's just let them shake. Like, oh no, there's something wrong with that person. Let's go stop them from shaking. And so as we grow up, unfortunately, we learn to suppress a lot of these natural responses, and that causes the trauma to become chronic and put us into these states in a more chronic and a dysfunctional way, so that we're constantly in fight or flight, to some degree, right? These states aren't entirely discrete. It's a little bit of a spectrum. Yeah, absolutely. Shaking can really help. If you're feeling hyperarousal, if you're noticing anxiety or stress, it can really help to downregulate your system to get up and shake it out. I mean, this is why exercise can be so effective, but shaking honestly can be even a little bit more effective, because there's a tendency to have some of this energy get, for lack of a better term, kind of get stuck in the body, right? So for example, if say that you were getting chased, and then you're no longer getting chased, but you're still in that hyper arousal, it could be really effective for you to either go take a run, or even have your legs shake a little bit to discharge that excess energy and bring you back towards ventral vagal, bring you back towards that optimal functioning state.
Right. So in today's context, probably we would not be chased by a lion, but maybe something like, I don't know, a car accident happened, or even social situations can drive us into hyperarousal. Anything that threatens our existence could do that. And you mentioned that then if the stress is not dealt with, if it's not somehow discharged out of the nervous system, it can become chronic. The first step would be recognizing that we have some kind of chronic charge or some kind of chronic stress in our nervous system. Do you know any telltale signs that we have stress in our nervous system?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you bring up that topic. I think identification really is the first step, right? Identify what state your nervous system is in. So there's a number of different sort of physiological, mental, emotional markers that can indicate either of these states to us. So I'll start with freeze, or with dorsal vagal, right? So this one's kind of depression. This is, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to get out of bed. You might be experiencing thoughts like, there's nothing I can do, right? Very helpless, hopeless. I'm stuck. Things are never going to get better. Those types of thoughts and similar emotions, depression. On the more physiological side, you might notice numbness, difficulty interacting with people. It really shuts down our ability to engage with people on a social level. And one of the ways that shows up is honestly just a difficulty in understanding the range of people's voices, right? So it can be really difficult just to understand what someone is saying to you when you're in a freeze state, because that range in our hearing is kind of numbed, kind of shut down at that point. So those are a few ways that you can start to identify the freeze state, right? And of course, some of those conditions end up being a little bit more chronic, like depression. And so, those are indicators that, okay, yeah, my nervous system is dysregulated, and I could potentially benefit by using some of these techniques that we're talking about today. And then we also, of course, we have the fight or flight, the sympathetic hyper arousal state. In that state, you might feel angry, frustrated. You might feel anxious or stressed. So those are some of the emotions. You might have thoughts like, "Oh, I have to do this. I have to, take care of this thing that's bothering me," right? Like feeling really a strong compulsion towards action. And on the physiological level, you kind of feel a little agitated, a little bit frenetic. You might, let's see, you might have a fast heartbeat. You might be breathing a little bit harder. It might be a little bit harder to control your breathing. You might feel just kind of hyper activated, like, oh, I have to move, I have to do something, right? So those are a few of the clues as to either of those states. And then, of course, if we want to talk about ventral vagal, you might feel just an overall sense of well-being, well regulated, very present. You might feel connected with the people around you. You might feel, just an overall sense of enjoyment for life. And yeah, so that's a few of the ways that you can start to identify those different states.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit tricky because some of those states that you described, like anxiety, depression, I mean, these are also generalized disorders. So I think people often jump to, how to say, diagnosing themselves with illnesses, or maybe I think it's easy also to get misdiagnosed with some illnesses mental illnesses, when actually what is in question is the nervous system. But what could one do to start calming down the nervous system and actually, check in with themselves and see if there is a problem with the state of arousal in the nervous system?
Yeah, so, and I think that's a really important point, because there are, this is definitely not to demean or make light of any situations, any conditions that anyone has, right? It's not to say, oh, it's just your nervous system. It's not to be dismissive at all, right? This is just another framework, another tool for examining, your experience and figuring out different techniques that you might try to employ and see if it helps, right? There might still be an underlying disorder, and that's kind of outside the scope of our conversation expertise here today. And so some of the things that you can do on very simple level, depending upon whether or not you're in the lower end of the arousal or higher end of the arousal. So if you're on the lower end, you want to upregulate. You want to kind of increase the level of arousal very gradually, very gently, right? So a number of things that you can do on that side, kind of how I mentioned before. You can do some orienting behaviors. You can kind of take in a little bit more stimulation, kind of gradually, gently. You can also work with the breath a little bit. Generally, I like to suggest an even breathing cadence, right? So a really good target is something like 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale, 5 or 6 seconds. And that'll kind of move you more towards that, even regulation, that well-regulated state. Overall, regardless of the survival state, the underlying one good underlying goal is to signal safety to your nervous system, because regardless of whether or not you're under aroused or over aroused, just telling the nervous system that, okay, actually I'm safe right now. I'm in a safe environment. There's not an existential threat, to my life right now. So it's starting to shift your relationship to whatever triggered you in the first place, but also to shift your relationship to symptoms, right? And by symptoms, I mean the anxiety or the depression potentially, because what ends up happening, so take anxiety, for example. We tend to not want to experience anxiety. So say something triggers you, whatever it is, and you start getting anxious, then that anxiety itself will end up becoming a source of dysregulation, because you're like, oh, I don't want to feel this anxiety. And the anxiety itself is sort of signaling to your nervous system that there's some immediate danger. So not only do we want to kind of shift our relationship to the triggers that put us in that state initially, but also shift our relationship to the symptoms of those triggers, because they kind of compound, they create kind of a feedback loop. And in the worst cases, the feedback loop can lead to something like an anxiety, a panic attack, right? Or it can put you into a chronic freeze response where you're just like, I can't do anything about what my body is doing to me, right? So basically, the name of the game is signal safety, and then either upregulate a little bit or downregulate. So on the downregulate side, that might be something like gradually extending the exhale. So one thing that I like to really emphasize and teach people is that when you're inhaling, you're actually upregulating a little bit. When you're exhaling, you're downregulating a little bit. This is actually the source of like heart rate variability, right? So your heart rate changes as you're breathing, right? And so if you extend the exhale, so it's just a little bit longer than the inhale, you'll kind of overall start to shift in the downregulation direction. And conversely, if the inhale is a little bit longer than the exhale, you'll start to upregulate yourself. Of course, you want to kind of do this rather gently, and that's why I often emphasize, well, let's just make the breath even.
Okay, so I have to take you on a small digression because you said something interesting there regarding HRV. So would that mean that if we are doing rhythmical breathing in the sense that the inhalation and the exhalation are about the same time, that this will lead also to kind of a better HRV?
Yeah. Oh, really, really great question there. So I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to heart rate variability and breathing, but I'll kind of do my best to explain what I understand about it. So heart rate variability, you can kind of see it as a proxy for overall health of your system, right? So for example, a lot of times athletes will have a very high heart rate variability. So between their inhale and their exhale, their heart rate may vary pretty significantly. Of course,
One question there is
yeah.
a higher HRV better or a lower HRV? What's the goal?
Yeah, really good question. So, and I was actually just going to touch on this. Generally speaking, higher heart rate variability is considered, synonymous with a higher level of health. However, at a certain point, the variation can be kind of too much. So, for example, if someone's like, and this can come about with really high levels of anxiety, having like an episode of supraventricular tachycardia, where they're having like an incredibly high heart rate, they may have a significantly high heart rate variability during that time. Also, it might be jumping up to maybe as high as like 180 or higher, but then also popping back down to quite a bit lower. That would show a high heart rate variability, but in that time, and at that level, it would be past kind of the optimal zone. So oftentimes it's kind of looked at as like resting heart rate variability. A lot of times you might record it like when you first wake up in the morning, when you're well rested in the afternoon. As far as specific numbers, I probably don't have good numbers around that. But in general, if you're measuring your heart rate variability and you're doing any of these exercises over time, you will see your heart rate variability, the baseline, increase a little bit.
Okay, so we basically by regulating or by controlling the breathing, we already have kind of a very simple but effective tool to either up or down regulate our nervous system. What I find interesting with the breath is that on the one hand, we can influence the nervous system, but on the other hand, it is also influenced by the nervous system, which means we could actually also look at the breath to find kind of indicators about what is triggering us, right? So if we're in a situation that is anxiety inducing or that is maybe in some sense related to a previous situation in which we experienced trauma, which we haven't processed properly, maybe we will experience like shallow breathing, right? Like or increased heart rate, or there's these indicators, these bodily indicators, which tell us, okay, my nervous system is not regulated at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good point there. I like to say that the breath, in a way, it's a two-way street. As you said, it can kind of indicate what state you're in. And it can also help inform that state when you start trying to consciously control the breath. And just to kind of complicate it a little bit further, getting back to this idea of how important it is, how we're relating to what's happening to us. If you kind of fight with the breath, even if you're kind of trying to push it in a more regulated direction, that can also kind of increase arousal or exacerbate some of these survival effects. So I like to emphasize a really gentle approach. Okay, so you notice that your breathing is a little bit shallow, maybe a little bit fast. Gradually start to shift it towards a slightly more regulated breath, right? Where it's a little bit longer, a little bit deeper, so a lot of times I like to suggest that you don't force it, right? Because if you're forcing it and you're seeing it as a problem, then that's kind of signaling to the nervous system that, okay, this also is a problem, right? So overall, that kind of brings us back to the point of it's so important, our relationship. Really, I'd almost say that that's key. It's almost fundamental to what we're talking about here. And stress and anxiety aren't necessarily problems unless we make them problems, unless we see them as problems, right? They're potentially useful things to help us get work done, right? And actually, that kind of brings me to a little bit of another topic. But do you have any other questions on that before we move on?
Feel free to jump to a different topic.
Yeah. So there's an interesting thought here. I had kind of described how these nervous system responses of survival responses can be really useful for, escaping a tiger or something, right? Like that doesn't happen to us, but that's the example I use. One of the ways where we kind of go awry in modern society, and this is something that we've done kind of unintentionally, right? But it happens in our experience as we grow up, is we start to elevate things that honestly aren't immediate existential threats to that same level, right? So, for example, and you can kind of see this as we're growing up as children. Like as a young child, if there's a tiger running after you, you're going to go into a survival response like automatically. You don't need to be taught that. You don't need to be trained that. But as a child, if you receive an overdue bill or something, it's probably not going to put you into a survival response. But as an adult, we've kind of learned that, hey, this is actually a really bad thing. This is something that we should be afraid of, right? So that kind of just brings up this idea of like why we end up being so dysregulated in modern society is kind of incidentally made so many things into an existential threat that, rationally speaking, aren't. I mean, of course, you could make the argument that an overdue bill could, precipitate, an existential threat long term, but it's not really how our systems were designed.
I would say it's still kind of a valid indicator that something is not quite right in the nervous system. So if we're experiencing, right, we said that these things are kind of a spectrum. So for example, anxiety, it's not realistic that we're not going to experience anxiety in our life, right? It's also something useful. For example, you have a public speaking opportunity in front of a big crowd. Maybe anxiety will help you to prepare properly and actually be focused in the moment, right? To be present in the moment. So there's also a useful aspect to these bodily responses. But if we experience them to what would be the right word? Amount or degree, right? That could be an indicator. So for example, if you're having an everyday situation and you suddenly experience like a really high amount of anxiety, maybe social anxiety, maybe these things, and when you think about it, maybe also with some distance if you get out of the situation, you think like, why did that make me so nervous? Why did that trigger anxiety? Or why did that situation, on the other hand, make me dissociate? I think those can be indicators. Okay, if there's a response going on which is not appropriate to the situation, it's probably something we should look into in the right container, right? So maybe from your perspective, what would be some of the right containers where you could start to work with these nervous system responses?
Yeah. Really great question. So first, I'd kind of tease apart. I'd separate out our relationship to the triggering experience, and then our relationship to the ensuing anxiety. So as we kind of touched on a little bit before, the triggering experience is, oftentimes say it's a public speaking engagement, right? This is something that to some degree ends up getting programmed in us. It's not necessarily an innate response to that situation. So there's two different ways that you can start to work on it, right? You can work with the trigger. So, and there are so many different ways to work with this. Typically they're divided into a couple of different categories. There's what are known as top-down approaches, which really focus on the mental side of things, right? So this might be like therapy, or it might be self-talk, like, hey, this is only a speaking engagement, it's not a huge problem, something like that, right? To that effect. And you contrast that with bottom up type exercises, which is a lot of what we've been talking about today. Basically things that work directly on the body to signal that safety. And there's also a third category, and that's the sort of the social engagement. It's co-regulation, right? So when we're around other people who are well regulated, who have well regulated nervous systems, that tends to bring us towards that state of well regulated, right? That well regulated state. So right, there are basically those three categories of approaches. And so right, going back to, we can work with our response to the trigger, and we can also work with our response to the symptoms of the trigger, right? Which is like the anxiety. And I think it can be really valuable, of course, to separate those out, look at them both, but also particularly valuable to work with our relationship to the symptoms, like anxiety, because that's where the compounding effects really come into play. So we can say that, okay, it's pretty normal to start to experience a little bit of anxiety if you have to talk in front of a crowd, or if you have to record a podcast, right? And so yeah, the anxiety comes up, maybe it helps you focus, and then notice how you're relating to the anxiety. If you can welcome it and you can be like, okay, this is a useful thing for the moment, then it won't necessarily get out of control, and it'll still stay a little bit within that well-regulated bounds, right? If all that makes sense.
Totally. I like what you said about correlating. We often forget that we are social beings, and that basically our nervous systems are not just coexisting, they're also influencing each other all the time. So if you're around somebody who's like very well regulated, it has an effect on you, and probably also the other way around. I was wondering, since we talked about co-regulating, if there's some sort of relational aspect to this, because all these things that you listed, they sound kind of like you would be able to do them on your own, right? I mean, breath work, relaxation techniques, orienting yourself in a room, even like reframing it's something that you can do kind of solo. But would you recommend doing these or some of these together with a therapist, with a coach, or is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, and it's spot on, when you're around someone who's well regulated, it tends to bring you into a well regulated state yourself. And so, yeah, absolutely. Sharing in team sports, or any sort of physical activity, doing breath work together. One thing I've become kind of keen on recently is this practice called circling, which basically you're kind of just sharing what's happening in your body, right? In your perception, kind of moment to moment. So you're describing, okay, in my body, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling this tension. I might be feeling a sense of activation. And then you might also describe a little bit on the emotional level. And in my experience, that brings you into a sense of connection with the other person very quickly. it's honestly kind of a little bit uncanny, but we'll often be experiencing something very, very similar at the same time, or in the people that we're in relationship to. And that can even be over the internet, right? Like, I mean, we're in totally different places, and there's a pretty good chance that, on the somatic level, we're experiencing fairly similar things. We might be interpreting it a little bit differently and responding to it a little bit differently. But our nervous systems are co-regulating even as we're sitting here.
Right. You said emotion for the first time, and I think we're talking about like 30 minutes now. And actually, it's a super important component in this whole story. And maybe it's worth, diving into that and how it relates also to the nervous system a bit. From my understanding, emotions would be kind of, we could say, signals coming from the body or from the nervous system that are signaling basically a certain state to us. And we then interpret them in a certain way. For example, if we are feeling some sort of unrest internally, that would be maybe an emotion, and we would be interpreting that as a feeling of anxiety. And then we already have labels for anxiety. I don't know, this happens always to me in these kind of situations, while actually all that is happening is the body telling us we're in a situation where that we need to leave, or it's trying to signal us for us to take some kind of action, right?
Yeah. Boy, you hit on a lot of really good things there. So let's see. First of all, around the emotions, they can be a bit of an interpretation of what's happening to us. So there are a couple different ways of understanding emotions, but one that I subscribe to and found pretty useful is this idea of sort of the constructionist view of emotions. And basically it says that an emotion is something that we're kind of creating in a way. Essentially, it's, I like to say, an amalgamation of sensory, sort of somatic information. So maybe that's tightness in your chest, a feeling of warmth, in your extremities or something, right? Just as an example, plus contextual information, right? So maybe it's like when I feel tightness in my chest and I'm around people that feel like they're threatening, then I know that equals fear, right? But you could also, so this is where another top-down approach comes in called reframing, where you might actually say, okay, actually that's not fear, that's excitement. And you can convince yourself and start to experience it a little bit differently. It might have the same underlying kind of somatic markers, right? Like an increased heart rate, maybe a little bit of activation. But if you see it differently, if you try to interpret it differently, it might actually change the way that you experience it, right? So reframing can be really useful in that sense. Let's see. You also hit on something else, and now it's kind of slipping my mind. But I'll stop there and see if you wanted to make any comment or had any thoughts around that.
So it's we can reframe emotions or feelings, and I think it's also important to be more granular in the sensing of emotions. Now, why I think this is important, because I have the feeling that people are not that great in actually reading their own emotions. If we take, for example, emotions that we would feel when we are depressed, that is actually already kind of a suppression of emotion happens, a dissociation from our own emotion is happening, and to the point where we just can point to it by saying, I am depressed. But if you would actually go and try to point exactly, okay, where are you feeling depressed? Because emotions also are usually associated with certain locations in the body. And if you try to kind of sharpen your senses and try to exactly point to, okay, where are you feeling depressed? What does it mean, depressed? Does it mean cold? Does it mean hot? Is it a good, is it a bad feeling? Then we would uncover that actually below a feeling, there is smaller subtypes of feeling. There's one really great tool that helps with that. It's called the emotion wheel. I forgot who authored it originally, but you can imagine it basically just with a wheel that has 2 layers, and on the inner layer there would be more rough feelings. Let's stay with the examples of depression, anxiety, and then for each of them you would have 2 to 4 more granular labels for emotions, which actually helps us identify and be more specific about the feeling. And if we identified it more specifically, then that has a different, or that has a similar effect like the reframing. We now are able to actually feel this emotion. And the interesting thing is, when we actually feel emotions, they seem to disappear most of the time. Like they seem to discharge most of the time. And I think this is why it's interesting in this whole context of the nervous system, because the nervous system is expressing these emotions to us, right? And all we have to do is read the signal, let it pass. That would be kind of the natural flow. But if we come into situations that are potentially life-threatening, that throw us into freeze response, into hyperarousal, then we maybe don't have time to process these emotions and they get stuck in the body. That's why it's a really good idea to start sharpening the sense around your emotions and learn to feel them and learn to let them discharge from your body, because I think that will bring a lot of lightness to your nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate all that you're saying there, and it makes a lot of sense within the context of what we're talking about. To kind of tie it back to this idea of how we're relating to things, right? It's this idea of you can relate to things with a sense of aversion, right? Where you're kind of trying to push it away. I don't want to experience that. Or you can relate to it with a certain amount of acceptance, right? And the more granularly you can feel something, the easier it is to accept it, the easier it is to say, okay, it's a lot harder to accept like this big nebulous dark depression, but if you can kind of break it down to its components and say like, okay, it's this flavor of depression, it has these components. Hey, I can deal with that. I can feel that for a little while, right? And as you were saying, it tends to move much more quickly, and it gives you a lot more emotional fluidity, right? It's really interesting how quickly emotions can move and can change. I mean, you see this in children all the time, right? As adults, we might get stuck in one emotion for a long period of time, but as kids, right, we cry it out and then we're like, joyful a couple minutes or even a couple seconds right after. And that's because, right as you were saying, that they were able to feel it and it was able to pass, and it's no longer just kind of stuck there. So yeah. And this also reminds me of the other thing that you touched on a little bit, is that there's sort of a wisdom in these emotions, right? Like there's a reason that they're showing up, right? So for example, with anger, anger can often be a motivation, when fully felt. It can be a good motivation to, for example, set healthy boundaries with someone, right? It can be telling you that, I'm allowing this person to walk all over me. I need to set some boundaries here. And that also can help you deal with that emotion. So yeah, a lot of good stuff there.
Very good. So anger. Exactly. I like that example, because imagine that you're suppressing anger, and that's just an emotion that you don't like to deal with that much, and you are not very experienced with feeling it in your body, then you're missing out this information and stuff like people stepping all over you, you not being able to set your boundaries. All these kind of things can happen, which is why it is probably a good idea to start building a relationship with anger, especially with anger, or especially with the emotions that you have some kind of aversion to. And one interesting detail that I only learned recently, but which helped me to reframe this whole thing a lot, was there was studies being done about emotional processing. And an emotion, kind of any emotion, if it flows through from your nervous system, through your internalized experiencing, if it's not stopped, so if you're not in a situation which is causing you freeze, hyperarousal, or anything like that, it actually only lasts 90 seconds.
Wow.
And if you think about that, so we are running away from certain negative emotions, right? Like think about grief, think about anger, think about these things, because they feel so heavy to us, and they feel like we will not be able to experience them without being damaged in some form.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just uncomfortable. But I think we would be able to tolerate almost any kind of feeling for 90 seconds, right? If you have
Yeah.
the certainty, I'm going to come out the other end in 90 seconds, we would be maybe more willing to go into a feeling, which leads me to another point that we haven't talked about yet, but which can be interesting in this context. And it's affect tolerance, right? So our willingness to deal with adversity and be willing to go into uncomfortable situations or feelings.
Yeah. So two really important things that you hit on there. Just this idea that emotions really don't last when we allow ourselves to experience it. And what it's a lot easier to do that once you've experienced it, right? Once you've experienced, okay, this emotion won't stay around forever if I allow myself to experience it. That can be a tough one to accept initially, but I think the motivation for doing it is well worth it, because otherwise, okay, you're subjecting yourself to countless bouts of anger for years or even decades, and versus just allowing yourself to fully feel it for what could be as little as a few minutes, right? I mean, it sounds a little unbelievable, but at least in my experience, that does tend to be true. If you allow yourself to experience it, then it can pass fairly quickly. Of course, there are some nuances around whether or not you're actually allowing yourself to experience it, or how much you're resisting it, and how much you're maybe projecting it out onto other people. I really like to emphasize like owning your emotions and not really justifying them, just being like, okay, this thing might have triggered me, but it triggered what it is a repressed emotion. And a lot of times this is where our very extreme responses to minor triggers might come up, right? And again, you see this in children where they stub their toe or something, and they just cry a lot, disproportionately seemingly to the trigger. And the reason that is because it's a repressed emotion that has an opportunity to come up. And what a great mechanism. Of course, societally and socially, we tend to push that back down. It's like, well, your response to that is totally disproportional. And now you got to repress that response. Ideally, we'd just let it express and move through it and be done with it. But we really, unfortunately, don't do that. Then you also hit on this other topic of affect tolerance. So I came across this topic originally from a book called The Practice of Embodying Emotions. I highly recommend it. It goes into somatic type therapies that allow you to really do a lot of this work and release a lot of these repressed emotions. But this idea of affect tolerance is basically our ability to be with and to some degree tolerate or even accept the sensory and the somatic aspect of what we're going through. So I really like to use like cold exposure as an example for this, because the wonderful thing about affect tolerance is it kind of translates. So by that, I mean, if you develop a greater cold tolerance where you're able to kind of just move into a really uncomfortable situation, like jump into a vat of ice water, right, and tolerate that without getting overreactive, that will translate to sort of your emotional and your social life and other aspects of your life, where suddenly you're able to tolerate more disturbing emotions, more disturbing situations, because you built up that essentially that affect tolerance. So yeah, it's a really powerful concept, one that I like to get into for sure. Do you have any questions on that one?
Yeah, I really like the cold exposure. I picked up on it from Wim Hof. You're aware of Wim Hof?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
And I mean, I started doing it, to be honest, just because of the sheer excitement that this man spreads, and you see him, being so happy
Yeah.
and well regulated, and you just, okay, there must be something to it. So, and he also teaches breath work and other things. And I noticed then when I do cold showers in the morning that somehow I am more regulated and like less stressed for most of the day. And I didn't really connect immediately that this what you describe is the mechanism, that it's basically our ability to tolerate adversity. And for anybody who has taken a cold shower, it's like pure adversity, right? It's your body immediately basically wants to jump out of the shower. It's the only thing the body wants to do. And if you're able to stay there, and I think this is also an important point, if you're able to relax your body within the cold, because that's basically, I mean, you being able to relax your body is basically you being able to regulate your nervous system.
Yep.
And if you're able to regulate your nervous system in the face of, well, cold water, I guess it transfers really well to other stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It goes back to that idea of how you relate to things means everything, right? I mean, it's very similar to how you relate to anxiety. If you can just relax in the face of anxiety, you're telling your nervous system that, hey, actually I'm safe, right? And so this is the way that we can kind of, and this is, a lot of the stuff that Wim Hof is starting to show us, and his, pretty amazing abilities. That the more that you can relax, the more that you're actually telling your autonomic nervous system, right, a part of our nervous system that we didn't think that we could really change or influence. Well, we can't exactly directly influence it, but we can by relaxing, by basically telling it, hey, this isn't a problem. This is okay. I'm safe here. This cold water is not gonna kill me. And that has so many beneficial effects. It allows your body to do what it needs to do. As anyone who has spent time doing cold showers or something, you'll notice the more that you relax, the longer you can stay in there, because your body is able to then respond to it appropriately. But if you kind of freak out, then your body's not going to respond appropriately. You're going to start, shivering or potentially going into hypothermia more quickly. And yeah, I mean, just a cascade of effects. It's so important just how you relate to it. Can you relax in the face of adversity?
Right. Although, to be fair, cold showers are not the most easy thing. Maybe it's not for everybody, if we're being honest. Do you have any other, maybe more low entry methods how somebody could increase their affect tolerance?
Yeah. So just developing a greater what's called interoception, so a greater sense of what's happening in your body. We tend to become very disconnected from what's going on within our body. And if you can just take a few moments, I mean, I recommend trying to integrate it into your day so that you're doing this all the time. It'll be so much more effective if you do it, 100 times for 1 second or 2 seconds throughout the day than if you do it like for 5 minutes every morning or something. Of course, both are great practices. But so to be specific about what you might do, you might check in with your contact points. That's a really good one. So by contact points, I mean where your body is in contact with the external environment. So say you're walking around, pay attention to your feet. What sensations are going on in your feet? What does the surface beneath you feel like? If you're sitting in a chair, what does the chair feel like? Just tune into that for a few seconds. We tend to be very numb to these things. We tend to really not notice them. But if you can start to bring a little bit more awareness to it, you'll start doing it automatically. And that will, in and of itself, increase your affect tolerance just by virtue of becoming aware of something that you weren't previously aware of. right? So another good one is just noticing your breath. Of course, if you've done any meditation, that tends to be a very common instruction, like pay attention to your breath. Well, check in with your breath throughout the day. Initially, for some people, the breath can be a little bit rocky, a little bit disturbing. So, tread with caution if the breath bothers you, but it can be a really useful one. Like, okay, how am I breathing? What does my breath feel like right now? Another good one is to check out your posture. A lot of times we're really not aware of our posture, but it can, not only is it, it's another one of these kind of two-way streets, just like the breath. When you're kind of hunched, when you're really constricted, you're more likely to kind of feel constricted. When you're more open in your posture, you're more likely to feel a little bit more open. So that's another good one to check in with throughout the day.
Amazing. I love the hint with the posture. That was for me really a big thing where I noticed some of my own emotional states also, because just by reading people's posture, you can kind of tell also what kind of emotions they're experiencing, and the same works for yourself, right? So if you're hunched over, or if you're like protecting your neck, that might be kind of indicating some kind of fear, or you're trying to be smaller, while I don't know, with the chest more open and standing tall would signify, I don't know, confidence, groundedness, and so on. And interestingly enough, these things are pretty intuitive, right? We know how to read people intuitively, and if we start reading ourselves, we can actually learn a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that you said that. I was about to say the same thing. If you want to learn to read people, investigate yourself.
Yeah,
and then you'll be able to do it.
Nice. I think we covered this topic quite extensively. So maybe we start wrapping up. But before that, maybe you can tell us a bit, since you also work on a one-on-one basis with people to help them, learn, regulate the nervous system, I guess. Maybe you can tell us how that goes, and what's the format exactly?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the call out there. Yeah, so basically it's a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. First, it's about understanding the different states of the nervous system, right? It's about learning to identify them through, the mental markers, through, what you're thinking, through the emotional markers, and through the physiological markers. Once you've been able to identify it, then it's about developing these techniques, right? I mean, everything that we've talked about, the top-down, the bottom-up techniques, and the co-regulating techniques, developing them to a point where you can really start to, shift the state of your nervous system effectively. And ideally, in the long run, even developing them to the point where they just kind of automatically come online. I mean, that's the best. Right? Where you start to notice anxiety, and automatically you start breathing a little bit differently. You start, behaving a little bit differently, so that you can shift your nervous system. So that's sort of like the level one approach, right? And then beyond that, it essentially gets back to this idea of then shifting your relationship, kind of developing the affect tolerance, as we talked about. And that, honestly, that's sort of potentially a lifelong journey, at least as far as I've come. I mean, I'm still working on those things, right? I mean, the podcast still raises my anxiety a little bit, right? So I like to kind of just, so my business, I call it Walk with Wally. And basically the idea is, hey, we're kind of on this same journey, and, I'll teach you what I've learned to the best of my ability. If anyone does want to check it out or anything, you can go to my website, walkwithwally.org, and book a session or something. But in any case, that's kind of the overall approach of what I do working with people.
Nice. Sounds amazing. Super interesting. Thanks for sharing so much about polyvagal theory. And I would say that's it for today. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.